The dust had turned to mud weeks ago, and then the mud had dried into cracks that mirrored the fractures spreading through Catherine Walsh's heart as she pressed her back against the rotting wood of the abandoned mill house, knowing that tonight might be the last night she drew breath. The year was 1876, and Mineral Point, Wisconsin had seen better days, much like Catherine herself, who at 23 had watched her world crumble faster than the old stone buildings the Cornish miners had left behind when the lead veins ran dry. Her fingers trembled as she broke off another piece of hardtack, the only food she had left, and she chewed slowly to make it last, washing it down with rainwater she had collected in a rusted tin cup. The storm 3 nights ago had been a blessing, filling every container she could find, but now those too were running low. Catherine had never imagined her life would come to this. Just 8 months earlier, she had been living in her family home on the edge of town, helping her mother with the washing they took in, mending clothes for the miners and their families, living a humble but honest life. Then the fever came. It swept through Mineral Point like a scythe through wheat, and within 2 weeks both her parents were gone, buried in the hillside cemetery beside her younger brother who had died in infancy years before. The landlord had been sympathetic for exactly 1 week before demanding the back rent her father had owed. Catherine had nothing. The small amount of money her parents had saved went to the doctor and the undertaker. She sold what furniture they owned, but it barely made a dent in the debt. When she could not pay, she was turned out into the street with nothing but the clothes on her back and her mother's worn shawl. At first, Catherine had tried to find work. She went to every household, every business, every farm within walking distance. But Mineral Point was dying along with its mines. The prosperous days of the 1840s and 50s were long gone. The population had dwindled. Those who remained had barely enough for themselves, let alone a young woman with no family and no prospects. Some looked at her with pity. Others looked at her with suspicion, as if poverty were contagious. A few men looked at her with something else entirely, something that made her skin crawl and sent her hurrying away. She had spent the first night sleeping in the church, curled up in a back pew, until the new minister discovered her and told her she could not stay. He offered prayers but no practical help. After that, she found the mill house, long abandoned since the creek that once powered it had changed course during a flood years ago. It was falling apart, gaps in the walls letting in the wind and rain, but it had a roof of sorts and it was shelter. For a while, she survived on wild berries and plants she remembered her mother pointing out as edible. She dug for roots. She caught rainwater. Once, she managed to catch a rabbit in a snare she made from a piece of wire she found, but she had no way to cook it properly, and the raw meat made her sick. After that, she stuck to what little she could forage or buy with the few pennies she earned doing odd jobs that never lasted long enough. A traveling merchant had given her a bag of hardtack 2 weeks ago in exchange for mending a tear in his coat. The hardtack was meant for long journeys, nearly indestructible and almost flavorless, but it was food. She had been rationing it carefully, but now she was down to 3 pieces. 3 pieces of hardtack and perhaps a day's worth of rainwater left in her containers. After that, she did not know what she would do. Catherine pulled her mother's shawl tighter around her shoulders. It was late September and the nights were getting colder. Soon winter would come, and she knew she would not survive it in this place. She closed her eyes and tried not to cry. She had shed so many tears already, for her parents, for her lost home, for the future she would never have. Now she felt hollow, scraped clean of everything but the basic animal need to survive one more day. The sound of hoofbeats made her freeze. Someone was riding past on the road that ran near the old mill house. Catherine held her breath, pressing herself further back into the shadows. After dark, it was usually trouble on those roads. Drifters, drunkards, men looking for things that did not belong to them. But the hoofbeats slowed, then stopped. Catherine's heart hammered against her ribs. She heard the creak of leather as someone dismounted, then footsteps approaching. A man's voice called out, low and cautious. "Hello, someone in there." Catherine said nothing. Maybe he would go away. Maybe he would assume he had been mistaken. "I saw your fire earlier," the voice continued. "Saw the smoke from the road. Just want to make sure everything is all right." Fire. Catherine frowned in confusion, then remembered. She had tried to make a small fire yesterday to warm herself, using scraps of wood from the mill. She had not thought anyone would notice the thin stream of smoke, but apparently someone had. "I am not looking for trouble," the man said. "Name is Thomas Quinn. I have a ranch about 5 miles south of here. Was heading back from town and saw the smoke. This mill has been empty for years, so I figured I should check it out." Catherine bit her lip. She could stay silent and hope he left, but he seemed determined. And something in his voice did not sound threatening. It sounded genuinely concerned. Still, she had learned to be cautious. "I am fine," she called out, trying to keep her voice steady. "Just passing through. I will be gone by morning." There was a pause. "Are you hurt? Do you need help?" "I said I am fine." But even as she said it, her stomach betrayed her with a loud growl that seemed to echo in the empty mill. She flushed with embarrassment, grateful for the darkness. Another pause, longer this time. When the man spoke again, his voice was gentler. "When did you last eat?" "A real meal, I mean." Catherine's throat tightened. She could not remember. "That is none of your concern." "Maybe not," Thomas Quinn agreed. "But I am going to concern myself anyway. I am coming in. Do not be frightened. I just want to talk." Before Catherine could protest, a tall figure appeared in the doorway. The moonlight behind him made it hard to see his features, but she could make out broad shoulders and a cowboy hat. He took a few steps inside, then stopped when he spotted her huddled in the corner. "Lord have mercy," he said softly. "How long have you been living out here?" "A few weeks." Catherine raised her chin, trying to hold onto some shred of dignity. "I told you I will be gone by morning. I am not causing trouble." Thomas moved closer, and in the dim light filtering through the gaps in the walls, Catherine could finally see his face. He looked to be in his late 20s, with dark hair that needed cutting and a face tanned from long days in the sun. His eyes were kind, she noticed. That was what struck her first. Kind and concerned. He looked around the mill house, taking in the moldy walls, the dirt floor, the pitiful collection of containers for rainwater, and the small pile of belongings Catherine had managed to keep. His jaw tightened. "This is not right," he said. "Nobody should be living like this." "Well, I am," Catherine said, defensive now. "I do not need your pity." "Good, because I am not offering pity," Thomas replied. He crouched down so he was at eye level with her, keeping a respectful distance. "What I am offering is dinner. And a place to sleep that has actual walls and a real roof. My ranch is not fancy, but it is warm and dry, and there is always plenty of food." Catherine stared at him, suspicious. "In exchange for what?" Understanding dawned in his eyes. "In exchange for nothing," he said firmly. "I am not that kind of man. I am talking about Christian charity. Basic human decency. Helping someone who needs help." "I do not need help," Catherine insisted, but her voice cracked on the last word. Thomas gestured to the hardtack sitting beside her. "That all the food you have?" She did not answer. "When did you last have a hot meal? Meat, vegetables, bread? When did you last sleep in a real bed?" Catherine felt the tears coming and hated herself for it. "I do not know you. Why would you help me?" "Because it is the right thing to do," Thomas said simply. Look, I know you have no reason to trust me. I am a stranger, but I am asking you to take a chance. Come back to my ranch at least for tonight. Have a meal, get some rest, and if you decide to leave in the morning, I will not stop you. I will even pack you provisions for the road. But please, do not spend another night in this place." Catherine looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of deception or ulterior motive. All she saw was sincerity, and something else, something that looked like genuine worry for her well-being. It had been so long since anyone had looked at her like that, like she mattered. "I do not understand why you would do this for a complete stranger," she whispered. Thomas was quiet for a moment, then he sat down properly, apparently settling in for a conversation. "About 4 years ago, my younger sister found herself in a bad situation. She had married a man who turned out to be cruel. When she finally got the courage to leave him, she had nowhere to go. She ended up living rough for a while before a kind woman in Galena took her in, gave her work and a place to stay until she could get back on her feet. That woman saved my sister's life. No exaggeration. I swore then that if I ever had the chance to help someone in need, I would do it. So here I am, trying to keep that promise." Catherine felt something inside her chest loosen slightly. "What happened to your sister?" "She is doing well now. Married to a good man, a farmer up near Prairie du Chien. They have 2 little ones and another on the way. But I shudder to think what might have happened if that woman had not helped her when she needed it most." He stood up and offered Catherine his hand. "My name is Thomas Quinn, and I am offering you help with no strings attached. This seat at my table is yours now, for as long as you need it." Catherine looked at his outstretched hand. Every instinct told her to be cautious, to protect herself. But another part of her, the part that was exhausted and hungry and so desperately lonely, wanted to trust him, wanted to believe that there was still kindness in the world. Slowly she reached out and placed her hand in his. His grip was warm and steady as he helped her to her feet. She swayed slightly, dizzy from standing too quickly, and Thomas steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "Easy now," he said. "When did you last eat?" "This morning," Catherine said. "A piece of hardtack." Thomas shook his head. "All right, let us get you back to the ranch. Can you ride?" "I used to," Catherine said, "but I have not been on a horse in years." "You can ride with me then. Do you have anything you need to bring?" Catherine looked around at her meager possessions. Her mother's shawl already wrapped around her shoulders, a change of clothes threadbare and worn, a small bundle of personal items, trinkets that had belonged to her mother. "Just this," she said, gathering up the small bundle. Thomas helped her outside to where his horse waited, a sturdy bay gelding who turned his head to inspect them with calm brown eyes. Thomas mounted first, then reached down to pull Catherine up behind him. She hesitated for just a moment before accepting his help, settling onto the horse's back and gripping Thomas's waist to steady herself. "Hold on tight," Thomas said, and clicked his tongue to urge the horse forward. As they rode through the darkness, Catherine rested her forehead against Thomas's back, too tired to maintain the pretense of strength any longer. The steady rhythm of the horse's gait was soothing, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a tiny flicker of something that might have been hope. The ride took about half an hour. Catherine could see little in the darkness, but she could tell when they passed through a gate onto private property. A dog barked in the distance, and Thomas called out a greeting. Then they were in a yard, and Catherine could make out the dark shapes of buildings. A house, a barn, what might have been a stable or chicken coop. Thomas dismounted and helped Catherine down, her legs unsteady beneath her. "Henry," he called out, and a moment later a middle-aged man emerged from the barn, carrying a lantern. "Boss," the man said, then noticed Catherine. "What is going on?" "This is Miss Catherine Walsh," Thomas said, and Catherine realized with a start that she had never told him her name. He must have noticed her confusion because he added, "You mentioned it when you were talking to yourself earlier. I heard you through the wall." Catherine felt her cheeks flush, wondering what else she might have said aloud without realizing. "Miss Walsh is going to be staying with us for a while," Thomas continued. "Can you take care of Rusty for me? I need to get her inside and fed." Henry nodded, though his expression was curious. "Course, boss. Good to meet you, Miss Walsh." "Thank you," Catherine managed to say. Thomas led her across the yard to the house. It was a simple structure, wood frame with a covered porch, but it looked sturdy and well-maintained. He opened the door and ushered her inside, lighting lamps as they entered. The house was modest but comfortable. They entered directly into the main room, which served as both kitchen and living area. There was a large stone fireplace, a wooden table with chairs, cabinets, and shelves along the walls. Catherine saw doors leading to what must be bedrooms. Everything was clean and orderly, if a bit sparse on decoration. It was clearly a bachelor's home, functional rather than fancy. "Have a seat," Thomas said, gesturing to the table. "Let me get the fire going and warm up some food." Catherine sank into one of the chairs, her body suddenly heavy with exhaustion. She watched as Thomas efficiently built up the fire in the stove, then began pulling out supplies. He filled a kettle with water and set it to heat, then rummaged in the pantry. "I have stew from yesterday," he said. "Should still be good, and I can make coffee or tea if you prefer." "Coffee would be wonderful," Catherine said softly. She could not remember the last time she had coffee. It had become too expensive a luxury long before her parents died. Thomas worked in comfortable silence, and Catherine found herself studying him properly for the first time. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own space, economical in his movements but not rushed. He was tall, she realized, probably around 6 feet, with a lean build that spoke of hard physical work. His clothes were simple but clean. Dark trousers, a worn shirt, suspenders, boots that had seen plenty of use but were well cared for. He had strong hands, she noticed. Working hands with calluses and old scars. But they moved gently as he ladled stew into a bowl, as he poured coffee into a tin cup. When he set both in front of her, along with a thick slice of bread, Catherine felt her eyes sting with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea what this means." "You are welcome," Thomas said. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down across from her. "Go ahead and eat. Take your time." Catherine picked up the spoon, her hand shaking slightly. The stew was simple, beef and vegetables in a rich broth, but to her it might as well have been a feast. She forced herself to eat slowly, knowing her stomach would rebel if she ate too quickly after so long with so little. The bread was fresh, the coffee strong and hot. It was the best meal she had ever tasted. Thomas sipped his own coffee and waited patiently. He did not press her with questions, did not stare, just gave her space to eat in peace. Catherine was grateful for that. When she finally finished, she felt almost human again, though exhaustion was pulling at her like a heavy blanket. "Better?" Thomas asked. "Much better," Catherine said. "I do not know how to thank you." "No thanks necessary." He stood and cleared the dishes. "You look exhausted. Let me show you where you can sleep." He led her to one of the bedrooms, carrying a lamp. It was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in quilts, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, a chest of drawers, and hooks on the wall for hanging clothes. "This was my sister's room when she lived here," Thomas explained. "She took most of her things when she moved, but the bed and furniture are still good. You can use it for as long as you need." Catherine looked around the room, then back at Thomas. In the lamplight, she could see his face more clearly. There was something solid about him, something trustworthy, but she still had to ask. "Why are you doing this, really?" Thomas met her eyes steadily. I told you about my sister, that is part of it, but honestly, because it is the right thing to do. Because I could not live with myself if I rode past that mill knowing someone was in there, living on hardtack and rainwater, and did nothing to help. Because we are supposed to look out for each other, even if we are strangers. Maybe especially if we are strangers. Catherine nodded slowly. I will not impose on your hospitality longer than necessary. I will start looking for work tomorrow. We can talk about that in the morning, Thomas said. For now, just rest. The privy is out back. There is water in the pitcher for washing, and there are more blankets in the chest if you get cold. If you need anything during the night, I am just across the hall. Do not hesitate to knock. Thank you, Catherine said again, because she could not seem to stop saying it. Thomas nodded and left, pulling the door closed behind him. Catherine stood in the middle of the room for a long moment, hardly believing her change in fortune. Just hours ago, she had been huddled in a ruined mill, down to her last bits of food and water, wondering if she would see another week. Now she stood in a warm, clean room with a soft bed and a full stomach. She washed her face and hands in the basin, the water blessedly clean and cold. She took off her boots and outer dress, which were filthy from weeks of rough living, and climbed into the bed in her chemise. The mattress was stuffed with straw, but it felt like heaven compared to the hard ground. The quilts were heavy and warm. Catherine pulled them up to her chin and closed her eyes. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt safe. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of cooking. For a moment, Catherine was disoriented, unable to remember where she was. Then it all came flooding back. Thomas Quinn, the ranch, the offer of help. Catherine sat up slowly, her body aching. Weeks of poor nutrition and sleeping rough had taken their toll. She felt weak and stiff, but the fear that had been her constant companion was gone, at least for the moment. She washed and dressed in her spare dress, which was not much better than the one she had worn yesterday, then ran her fingers through her tangled hair, trying to make herself presentable. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Thomas at the stove, frying eggs and bacon. He looked up and smiled when he saw her. Good morning. Sleep well, better than I have in months, Catherine admitted. What time is it? Nearly 8. I let you sleep. You looked like you needed it. He gestured to the table, which was already set. Breakfast is almost ready. Catherine sat down, feeling awkward. In the daylight, she could see the house more clearly. It was indeed simple but well kept. The furniture was sturdy and handmade. There were books on a shelf by the fireplace, a rifle mounted on the wall, a coat rack by the door. Through the window, she could see the yard and outbuildings, and beyond them rolling hills dotted with cattle. You have a cattle ranch? She asked. Yes, Thomas said, bringing plates to the table. Eggs, bacon, biscuits, and butter. Another feast. Nothing huge. About 300 head, give or take. I run it with help from Henry. He is my foreman, and 2 other hands, Jake and Sam. We manage. Catherine picked up her fork. And you built all this yourself, more or less. I came out here 5 years ago with money I saved working on the railroad. Bought the land cheap because nobody wanted it. They said the soil was not good for farming and it was too far from town to be convenient. But it turned out to be perfect for cattle. I built the house and barn the first year, and I have been adding to it ever since. He took a bite of bacon, chewing thoughtfully. It is not an easy life, but it is mine. I answer to no one, make my own decisions, succeed or fail on my own merits. I like that. It sounds wonderful, Catherine said, and meant it. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. Then Thomas said, So tell me about yourself. How did you end up in that mill? Catherine set down her fork, her appetite suddenly gone. But she owed him an explanation. So she told him. About her parents dying in the fever outbreak, about the debts and the eviction. about her failed attempts to find work, the nights in the church, the weeks in the mill. She kept her voice steady and matter-of-fact, not wanting his pity, just stating the facts. Thomas listened without interrupting. When she finished, his jaw was tight again, the way it had been last night when he first saw how she was living. "I am sorry," he said finally. "About your parents, about all of it. You deserved better." "Life is not about what we deserve," Catherine said quietly. "It is about what we can survive." "Maybe," Thomas allowed. "But survival is not the same as living. You should not have to spend your days just trying to make it to the next day." Catherine looked down at her plate. "What choice did I have? Nobody in Mineral Point would hire me. I had no money to go anywhere else. No family, no friends who could help. I did the best I could." "I know you did," Thomas said, "and I am not criticizing. I just think you deserve a chance at something better." He paused, then said carefully, "I have a proposition for you, a business proposition." Catherine looked up warily. "What kind of proposition?" "I need help around the ranch," Thomas said. "Between managing the cattle, maintaining the buildings, and keeping the books, I am stretched thin. Henry and the boys handle the outdoor work, but the house is a mess. I can barely keep up with laundry and cooking, and my accounting is a disaster. I have been thinking for a while that I need to hire someone to help with all that. If you were willing, the job is yours." Catherine blinked. "You are offering me a job?" "Yes. Room, board, and wages. Nothing extravagant but fair. You would have your own room, all your meals, and $30 a month. In return, you would handle the cooking, cleaning, laundry, and help me keep the ranch accounts in order. Can you read and write?" "Yes," Catherine said. "My mother taught me, and I can do figures too. I used to help my father with his bookkeeping." "Perfect. So what do you say?" Catherine stared at him, torn between hope and suspicion. "This feels like charity." "It is not charity," Thomas said firmly. "I genuinely need help, and you genuinely need work. This is a fair exchange. If you do not believe me, ask Henry. He has been telling me for a year that I need to hire someone to help with the house. I just kept putting it off because I did not want to deal with finding someone trustworthy." "And you trust me. You just met me last night." "I am a pretty good judge of character," Thomas said. "Besides, it is not like you have any reason to take advantage of me. You need this job, I need the help. It works out for both of us." Catherine wanted to believe him. She wanted so badly to believe that her luck had finally turned, that she had found not just shelter but a real opportunity. Still, she hesitated. "What if it does not work out? What if you decide you do not want me here?" "Then I will give you a month's notice and a full month's wages to help you get settled somewhere else," Thomas said. "But I do not think that will happen. I think this will work out just fine." Catherine took a deep breath. "All right. Yes, I accept your offer." Thomas smiled, and Catherine noticed that it changed his whole face, making him look younger and less careworn. "Good. I am glad. Welcome to the Quinn Ranch, Miss Walsh. Please call me Catherine." "Catherine," he repeated, and she liked the way he said her name. Respectful but warm. "And you should call me Thomas. We are going to be living under the same roof. No point being overly formal." Catherine nodded, feeling something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. It took her a moment to recognize it as hope. The first few days passed in a blur of activity. Catherine threw herself into her new responsibilities with determination. She cleaned the house from top to bottom, swept and scrubbed and dusted until everything shone. She washed and mended Thomas's clothes and linens. She took inventory of the pantry and made lists of supplies they would need. She cooked meals that were simple but hearty, the kind of food working men needed. Thomas was right that he had needed help. The house had been neglected, with dust in every corner and unwashed dishes piled in the basin. His clothes were clean, but many needed mending. The pantry was disorganized, with supplies running low on staples like flour and sugar. And when he showed her his account books, Catherine nearly laughed at the chaos. Numbers were scrawled everywhere with no clear system. Receipts were stuffed randomly between pages, and she could not for the life of her figure out what his actual profits or losses were. "I know it is bad," Thomas said sheepishly, watching her flip through the ledger with dismay. "It is terrible," Catherine said bluntly. "How do you know if you are making money or losing it?" "I just sort of keep track in my head." Catherine shook her head. "That is no way to run a business. Give me a few days and I will have this sorted out." She was as good as her word. Catherine had a head for numbers, a gift she had inherited from her father, and she set about bringing order to the financial chaos. She created new ledgers with clear categories for expenses and income. She organized the receipts and matched them to transactions. She calculated profits and losses for the past year and presented Thomas with a clear picture of where his business stood. "You are actually doing quite well," she told him, showing him the figures. "Better than you probably thought. You just need to keep better track of it." Thomas looked at the neat columns of numbers with something like awe. "You did all this in 3 days. It was not that difficult once I understood your system, or lack of system." Catherine allowed herself a small smile. "From now on, I will keep the books updated weekly. That way you will always know exactly where you stand." "You are a miracle worker," Thomas said, and he sounded like he meant it. As the days turned into weeks, Catherine began to settle into her new life. She established a routine: up early to make breakfast for Thomas and the ranch hands, then cleaning and laundry while the men worked with the cattle. Afternoons were for cooking, mending, and bookkeeping. Evenings, she and Thomas would often sit by the fire after supper, talking quietly or reading. Catherine had not expected to enjoy Thomas's company as much as she did. He was intelligent and thoughtful, with a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard. He told her stories about his time working on the railroad, about traveling out west before settling in Wisconsin, about the challenges and rewards of building something from nothing. In turn, she found herself opening up about her own life, about her parents and her childhood, about the dreams she had once had before everything fell apart. "I wanted to be a teacher," she admitted one evening as they sat by the fire. October had arrived, bringing cold winds and the smell of coming winter. "I loved learning, loved reading. My mother used to say I always had my nose in a book. I thought maybe someday I could teach other children, help them discover how wonderful learning could be." "You still could," Thomas said. "There is no reason you could not pursue that dream." Catherine shook her head. "That was a different life, a different Catherine. That girl does not exist anymore." "I do not believe that," Thomas said quietly. "I think she is still there. She just got buried under grief and hardship." "But she is not gone." Catherine looked at him, surprised by the conviction in his voice. "You barely know me." "I know enough," Thomas said. "I know you are strong. You survived something that would have broken most people. I know you are smart and capable and hardworking. I know you have not let bitterness poison your heart, even though you would have every right to be bitter. That takes real strength of character." Catherine felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. "You have a very generous opinion of me." "I have an accurate opinion of you," Thomas corrected. He held her gaze for a moment longer, and Catherine felt something shift between them, something she was not quite ready to name. She looked away first, her cheeks warm. "Thank you. That means more than you know." The conversation moved on to safer topics, but Catherine found herself very aware of Thomas for the rest of the evening. The way he laughed at something she said, the way the firelight played across his features, the way he looked at her sometimes, like she was someone worth looking at. It had been so long since anyone had looked at her like that, since she had felt like anything other than a burden or an object of pity. With Thomas, she felt like herself again, like a person with value and dignity, like someone who mattered. It was a dangerous feeling, she knew. She was here as an employee, nothing more. She should not let herself think of Thomas as anything other than her employer, but her heart was not listening to logic. Her heart was starting to hope for things that could never be. November brought the first snow. Catherine stood at the kitchen window one morning, watching the fat flakes drift down from a gray sky, and felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. If Thomas had not found her when he did, she would have still been in that mill. She would have frozen to death in the first winter storm. "Thank you," she whispered to the man who could not hear her, who was out in the barn with Henry checking on the cattle. "Thank you for saving my life." That evening, Thomas came in from the cold with news. "Big storm coming," he told Catherine as he shook snow from his coat. "Henry says it is going to be a bad one. We are going to bring the cattle closer to the barn, make sure everything is secure. Might be stuck inside for a few days." "I will make sure we have plenty of food prepared," Catherine said, "and extra wood for the fire." The storm hit that night. Wind howled around the house, rattling the windows. Snow fell so thick that Catherine could not see the barn from the kitchen window. Thomas and the hands worked through the night in shifts, checking on the cattle, making sure none wandered off and got lost in the blizzard. Catherine kept coffee hot and food ready, waiting up to make sure the men had something warm when they came in from the cold. By morning, the world had disappeared under a blanket of white. The storm continued for 2 more days, trapping them all inside. Henry and the other hands stayed in the bunkhouse, while Catherine and Thomas were alone in the main house. It should have been awkward, but instead it felt almost cozy. They spent the time reading, talking, playing chess by the fire. Thomas taught Catherine the game, and she picked it up quickly, winning her 3rd game against him. "You are a natural," Thomas said, studying the board. "Or I am losing my touch." "Maybe both," Catherine teased, and was rewarded with one of his rare, full smiles. On the 3rd day, the storm finally broke. The sun came out, blindingly bright against all that white. The men dug out the paths between buildings and checked on the livestock. Miraculously, they had not lost any cattle to the storm. "We got lucky," Thomas told Catherine. "Another few degrees colder and we would have had real problems." "It is only November," Catherine said, worried. "What will January be like?" "Worse," Thomas admitted, "but we will manage, we always do." As winter settled in, Catherine found herself watching Thomas more and more. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the way he was always patient with her questions about ranch management, the way he made sure she had everything she needed, not as an employer but as a friend, the way he sometimes looked at her when he thought she was not paying attention, with an expression that made her heart skip. She tried to tell herself it meant nothing, that she was reading too much into simple kindness. But it was getting harder to ignore the way she felt when he was near, the way her day felt brighter when he came in from the cold, the way she found excuses to stay up after supper just to spend more time in his company. Christmas approached, and Catherine realized with a pang that it would be her first without her parents. She tried not to let it show, tried to maintain her usual cheerful efficiency, but on Christmas Eve, she found herself in tears while making pies for the next day's dinner. "Catherine." Thomas's voice made her jump. She had not heard him come in from the barn. "What is wrong?" "Nothing," she said quickly, wiping her eyes with her apron. "I am fine, just something in my eye." Thomas came closer, his expression concerned. "You are crying. What happened?" "It is nothing," Catherine insisted. "Just being foolish, ignore me." But Thomas did not ignore her. Instead, he gently took the rolling pin from her hands and set it aside. "Talk to me, please." Catherine's defenses crumbled. "It is Christmas Eve," she said, her voice breaking. "Last year at this time, my mother was making pies just like this. My father was singing carols. He always sang carols on Christmas Eve even though he could not carry a tune. We were all together and happy, and I had no idea it would be the last Christmas we would have as a family. And now they are gone and I am here and I am so grateful I am. But I miss them so much, and I just wish I could go back and have one more Christmas with them." She dissolved into sobs, and to her shock, Thomas pulled her into his arms. She stiffened for just a moment, then let herself lean into him, crying into his shoulder while he held her gently, one hand rubbing soothing circles on her back. "I am so sorry," he murmured. "I know it hurts, I know it is hard, but they would be glad that you are safe, that you are here, that you are building a new life." "I feel like I am forgetting them," Catherine whispered. "Like if I am happy here, I am betraying their memory." "That is not how it works," Thomas said. "You can honor their memory and still move forward. You can miss them and still find joy in your life. That is not betrayal, that is survival, that is healing." Catherine pulled back enough to look up at him. "How do you know? Have you lost people too?" "My parents died when I was 19, Thomas said. "Cholera, both of them within days of each other. For a long time, I felt guilty every time I laughed or enjoyed something, like I was dishonoring them by not staying in mourning forever. But eventually I realized they would not have wanted that for me. They would have wanted me to live a full life, to be happy." "Your parents would want the same for you," Catherine nodded slowly. "I think you are right. I just wish it did not hurt so much. I know." Thomas reached up and gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. The gesture was tender, intimate, and Catherine's breath caught. They were standing so close, his arms still loosely around her, his face just inches from hers. For a moment, she thought he was going to kiss her. For a moment, she wanted him to. But then Thomas seemed to catch himself. He stepped back, clearing his throat, his ears slightly red. "Sorry," he said. "I did not mean to overstep." "You did not," Catherine said quickly, but the moment was broken. Thomas had retreated behind the wall of polite employer again, and she did not know how to reach him. They finished preparing for Christmas in awkward silence. But that night, as Catherine lay in bed, she replayed the moment over and over in her mind. The way Thomas had held her, the way he had looked at her, the way her heart had raced when he touched her face. She was in love with him. The realization should have shocked her, but instead it felt inevitable. How could she not love him? He had saved her life, given her a home, treated her with nothing but kindness and respect. He was good and honorable and everything she had ever wanted in a man, but it was an impossible situation. She was his employee. He had taken her in out of charity, given her work because she needed it. The last thing she wanted was to make him uncomfortable or feel like he had to return feelings she should not even have. She would keep her heart to herself and be grateful for what she already had. Christmas Day was bittersweet. Catherine cooked a feast, and Thomas invited Henry and the other ranch hands to join them. They ate and sang songs and exchanged small gifts. Thomas gave Catherine a beautiful blue scarf he had bought in town, and she gave him a pair of warm gloves she had knitted in secret over the past few weeks. It was a good day, full of warmth and laughter. But that night, alone in her room, Catherine cried herself to sleep for what she had lost, and what she could never have. The new year of 1877 arrived with more snow and bitter cold. Catherine and Thomas settled back into their routine, both of them perhaps a bit more careful around each other than they had been. Catherine tried not to let her feelings show, and Thomas seemed determined to maintain proper boundaries. It was torture and comfort all at once. Every day, Catherine fell a little more in love with him. Every smile, every conversation, Every moment they spent together just made it worse. But she treasured those moments anyway, storing them up like precious gems even as she tried to convince herself that friendship was enough. Then came the day in late January that changed everything. Catherine was in the barn, gathering eggs from the chicken coops, when she heard shouting. She dropped the basket and ran outside to find Henry and the other hands clustered around something in the snow. As she got closer, she realized it was Thomas, lying motionless on the ground. "What happened?" she cried, pushing through to kneel beside him. "Horse spooked," Henry said grimly. "Threw him hard, hit his head on the fence post." Catherine's hands shook as she checked Thomas for injuries. There was blood on the side of his head, and he was unconscious but breathing. "We need to get him inside, carefully." The men carried Thomas into the house and laid him on his bed. Catherine cleaned the wound on his head, which looked worse than it was, more bleeding than damage. But he still had not woken up, and that terrified her. "Someone needs to ride for the doctor," she said. "Roads are too bad," Henry said. "Storm last night blocked the main road. It will take a day at least to clear it enough for a wagon to get through." "Then we wait," Catherine said, her voice steadier than she felt. "And we watch him. If he gets worse, if he develops a fever or starts convulsing, one of you will ride for help no matter the roads." Henry nodded. "We will be nearby if you need us." The hands left, and Catherine was alone with Thomas. She pulled a chair up beside the bed and took his hand, willing him to wake up. The afternoon faded into evening, and still he slept. Catherine talked to him, begged him to open his eyes, prayed more desperately than she ever had in her life. "Please," she whispered, pressing his hand to her cheek. "Please do not leave me. I just found you. I cannot lose you too." Night fell. Catherine lit a lamp and kept her vigil, checking his pulse, his breathing, the wound on his head. Everything seemed stable, but he still would not wake. Exhaustion pulled at her, but she refused to sleep. She would not leave him alone. She would be here when he woke up. It was nearly midnight when Thomas finally stirred. His eyes fluttered open, confused and unfocused. "Catherine," he mumbled. "I am here," she said, relief flooding through her so powerfully she felt dizzy. "I am right here." "What happened?" "You got thrown from your horse, hit your head. You have been unconscious for hours." She put a hand on his forehead, checking for fever. His skin was cool, clammy. "How do you feel?" "Like I got kicked by a horse," Thomas said with a weak attempt at humor. His eyes focused on her face, taking in her obvious distress. "You are crying." "Of course I am crying," Catherine said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "You were lying in the snow, bleeding and unconscious, and I thought you were going to die, and I realized I cannot bear the thought of a world without you in it. And yes, I am crying because I was so frightened, and I know I should not feel this way. I know it is not appropriate, and you are my employer, and I should just be grateful for everything you have done for me, but I cannot help it, because I love you and I know that ruins everything, but I cannot pretend anymore." She clapped a hand over her mouth, horrified. She had not meant to say any of that. The fear and exhaustion had loosened her tongue, and now she had said the thing that could never be unsaid. Thomas was staring at her. "You love me." Catherine wanted to take it back, to laugh it off, to make some excuse, but she was so tired of pretending. "Yes," she whispered. "I love you. I am sorry. I know you did not want this. I know it makes everything complicated. I will leave if you want me to. I will understand." "Leave." Thomas pushed himself up on his elbows, wincing. "Why would I want you to leave?" "Because I just made everything awkward and terrible," Catherine said miserably. "Because you gave me a job out of kindness, and I repaid you by developing inappropriate feelings, and now you are probably going to feel uncomfortable in your own home." "Catherine," Thomas said, and there was something in his voice that made her look up at him. "I do not want you to leave. I want you to stay, not as my employee, as my wife. Catherine's mind went blank. What? I love you, Thomas said, reaching for her hand. I have loved you for months, since Christmas, maybe earlier. I see you every day and I think about how lucky I am that I found you, that you are here. But I did not say anything because I did not want you to feel obligated. You are dependent on me for your livelihood, your home. I was afraid that if I told you how I felt, you would feel pressured to reciprocate out of gratitude or fear of losing your position. So I kept quiet and told myself that having you in my life as a friend was enough. But it was not enough, Catherine said slowly, beginning to understand. No, Thomas agreed. It was not. I want more. I want everything. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to build a life with you, a family with you. I want to grow old with you. If you feel even a fraction of what I feel, if there is any chance you could love me not because I helped you, but because of who I am, then I am asking you to marry me. Catherine felt like she could not breathe. You want to marry me? More than anything, Thomas said, but only if you want it to. Only if your feelings are real and not born from gratitude or obligation. I need you to be honest with me, Catherine. Do you love me because of what I have done for you, or do you love me for myself? Catherine thought about the question. She thought about the man Thomas was. Kind but not weak. Generous but not a fool. Hardworking, honest, patient, thoughtful. She thought about his laugh, his stories, his quiet strength. She thought about how safe she felt with him, how happy, how completely herself. I love you for yourself, she said finally. I am grateful for everything you have done for me, of course I am. But that is not why I love you. I love you because you are a good man, because you make me laugh. Because you listen when I talk and you care about what I think and feel. Because when I am with you, I feel like I have come home, not to this house, but to you. You are my home, Thomas. Thomas's face transformed with a smile so bright it took her breath away. Then say yes, marry me, be my wife. Please? Yes, Catherine said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, of course, yes. Thomas pulled her down and kissed her, and it was everything Catherine had dreamed it would be, sweet and gentle and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both of them were grinning like fools. You should rest, Catherine said, trying to be practical even though her heart was soaring. You hit your head pretty hard. I will rest later, Thomas said. Right now I just want to look at you and remember that you said yes, that you are going to be my wife. I said yes, Catherine confirmed, still hardly believing it, but you really should rest. Doctor's orders. You are not a doctor. No, but I am going to be your wife, which means you have to do what I say. Thomas laughed, then winced and put a hand to his head. All right, you win. But stay with me. I am not going anywhere, Catherine promised. She stayed beside his bed all night, holding his hand, watching him sleep. The fear had transformed into joy so intense it was almost painful. Just a few months ago, she had been alone and starving, certain her life was over. Now she had a home, a purpose, and a man who loved her. She had a future again. She had hope. In the morning, Thomas insisted he was fine despite a splitting headache, and they told Henry and the others the news. The men were delighted, shaking Thomas's hand and congratulating them both. Henry, in particular, seemed pleased. About time, he said to Thomas. Been watching you two dance around each other for months. Glad you finally did something about it. Catherine blushed. Were we that obvious? Yes, Henry said flatly, and everyone laughed. They were married 3 weeks later by the minister in Mineral Point. It was a small ceremony, just Henry and the ranch hands as witnesses, but it was perfect. Catherine wore a simple dress of pale blue that Thomas had bought for her, and she carried wildflowers even though it was February. When Thomas slipped the gold ring on her finger and kissed her as his wife, Catherine felt her heart would burst with happiness. The wedding night was tender and sweet. Thomas was gentle with her, patient, making sure she felt safe and loved. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, and Catherine felt complete in a way she never had before. "I cannot believe this is real," she whispered. "That I get to keep you." "You get to keep me," Thomas confirmed, pressing a kiss to her forehead, "for the rest of our lives. You are stuck with me now, Mrs. Quinn." "Mrs. Quinn." Catherine smiled into the darkness. She had lost so much, but she had gained everything that mattered. The months that followed were the happiest of Catherine's life. She threw herself into making their house a real home, adding small touches of comfort and beauty. She planted a garden in the spring, growing vegetables and herbs and flowers. She continued to manage the ranch books and keep the house running smoothly, but now it felt different. She was not an employee or even just a friend. She was Thomas's wife, his partner, his equal. Their love deepened as they learned each other's rhythms and habits. Catherine discovered that Thomas liked to read before bed and that he was ticklish on his ribs. Thomas learned that Catherine hummed while she worked, and that she had a stubborn streak a mile wide when she thought she was right about something. They had their first fight in April, over something silly she could not even remember later, and made up sweetly afterward. They learned to navigate disagreements and compromise, to communicate and forgive. By summer, Catherine suspected she might be pregnant. She waited until she was sure before telling Thomas, afraid to say anything in case she was wrong. But when the signs became unmistakable, she pulled him aside one evening after supper. "I have something to tell you," she said, trying to keep her voice casual. Thomas looked up from the newspaper he had been reading. "What is it?" "We are going to have a baby," Catherine said, and watched his face transform with wonder. "A baby," he repeated. "Really, really," Catherine confirmed. "In late January, if my calculations are right." Thomas stood up so fast he knocked his chair over. He crossed to her in 2 strides and swept her into his arms, spinning her around. Catherine laughed and held on tight, dizzy with happiness. "We are going to be parents," Thomas said, setting her down and pressing his forehead to hers. "That is the best news I have ever heard." The pregnancy was not easy. Catherine struggled with nausea in the early months, then exhaustion and swelling as she grew larger. But Thomas was attentive and supportive, taking over more of the household duties and insisting she rest. He talked to her growing belly at night, telling their unborn child stories and promises about the life they would have. As Catherine's due date approached, Thomas became almost comically anxious. He insisted on having the doctor on call, even though it was the middle of winter. He fretted over every little thing, driving Catherine crazy with his hovering. "I am fine," she told him for the 100th time. "Women have been having babies since the dawn of time. I can handle this." "I know you can," Thomas said, "but I still worry. I love you too much not to worry." Catherine softened. "I love you too, and I promise to let you know if anything feels wrong." The baby came on a cold night in late January 1878, nearly 2 years after Thomas had found Catherine in the old mill house. The labor was long and difficult, and Thomas paced the hallway outside their bedroom, terrified. Finally, just after dawn, he heard a baby's cry. A moment later, the doctor opened the door, smiling. "Congratulations," he said. "You have a healthy son." Thomas burst into the room to find Catherine propped up against the pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Thomas approached slowly, almost reverently. Catherine pulled back the blanket to reveal a tiny red face, eyes scrunched shut, one small fist waving in the air. The baby was perfect. He was beautiful. He was theirs. "What should we name him?" Thomas asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. Catherine had been thinking about this for months. I want to name him after my father. His name was William." "William Quinn," Thomas said, trying it out. "I like it. Will for short." "Will," Catherine agreed. She looked down at their son, her heart so full she thought it might overflow. "Hello, William. Welcome to the world." Thomas sat on the edge of the bed and put his arm around Catherine's shoulders, and together they gazed at their son. Their miracle, the physical proof of their love and their new life together. The next few months were exhausting. William was a fussy baby, colicky and difficult to soothe. Catherine and Thomas took turns walking him through the night, bouncing and singing and trying everything to calm him. They were constantly tired, constantly overwhelmed, but neither would have traded it for anything. Slowly, William settled into a routine. He began to sleep longer stretches. He started to smile, and then to laugh, a sound that delighted both his parents. Catherine discovered that he loved being outside, that the fresh air and sunshine calmed him when nothing else would. Thomas built a cradle that could rock, and they kept it near the fireplace where William could be warm. By the time William was 6 months old, Catherine felt like they were finally finding their balance as a family. The ranch was doing well financially, thanks in large part to Catherine's careful management of the books. They had expanded the herd and hired another hand to help with the work. The house was full of life and love and laughter. One evening in late summer, Catherine and Thomas sat on the porch, watching the sunset. William was asleep in his cradle inside, finally down for the night after an unusually fussy day. Thomas had his arm around Catherine, and she leaned into him, content. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Catherine asked. "If you had not ridden past that mill that night." "All the time," Thomas admitted. "I think about how close I came to just going home without checking, how easy it would have been to assume the smoke was nothing. And then I think about everything I would have missed if I had made that choice. You, our son, this life, it terrifies me." "Me too," Catherine said. "I was so close to giving up. Another week and I do not think I would have made it. You saved my life, Thomas." "We saved each other," Thomas said. "You saved me from a lonely existence. You made this house a home. You gave me a family. You gave my life meaning beyond just work and survival." Catherine turned to look at him. "I love you." "I love you too," Thomas said and kissed her gently. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. Catherine thought about the girl she had been, starving and hopeless in that abandoned mill. That girl could never have imagined this future, this happiness. She had thought her life was over, that she had nothing left to live for, but Thomas had seen something in her worth saving. And in saving her, he had given her everything. A home, a purpose, a family, a love that sustained and completed her. She had gone from having nothing to having everything that mattered. "This seat at my table is yours now." That was what he had said to her that first night. At the time, Catherine had thought he was just talking about a meal, a temporary reprieve, but he had meant so much more than that. He had been offering her a permanent place in his life, in his home, in his heart, and she had taken that seat. She had claimed her place at his table and in his life. She had fought her way back from the edge of despair and built something beautiful from the ashes of her old life. William cried out inside the house and Catherine sighed. "Duty calls." "I will get him," Thomas said, standing. "You rest." Catherine watched him go inside, heard him speaking softly to their son, and felt a swell of love so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. This was her family. These two people were her whole world. The years passed, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of their growing family. William learned to walk, then to run, tearing around the ranch with boundless energy. Catherine became pregnant again, and in the spring of 1880 she gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, after Thomas's mother. Rose was an easier baby than William had been, placid and sweet-tempered from the start. Thomas proved to be a wonderful father, patient and playful with their children. He taught William to ride as soon as the boy was big enough to sit a horse. He carved toys for both children and spent hours on the floor playing with them. No matter how tired he was from working the ranch, Catherine had never been happier. She watched Thomas with their children and fell in love with him all over again. She thought about the empty, frightened girl she had been and marveled at the woman she had become. She was stronger now, more confident. She had learned that she could survive anything, that she could build a life from nothing but determination and hope. In 1882, another son arrived, and they named him James after Thomas's father. The house that had once seemed so empty was now bursting with life and noise and love. Catherine's days were full of cooking and cleaning and caring for 3 small children, but she would not have changed a thing. Henry retired from the ranch in 1883, too old for the hard work anymore. They threw him a party and gave him a generous pension, and he moved to town to live with his sister. A new foreman was hired, a young man named David who proved capable and trustworthy. The ranch continued to prosper under Catherine's careful management and Thomas's hard work. They expanded their holdings, buying adjacent land when it became available. They built a new barn and improved the house, adding more rooms for their growing family. They were not rich by any means, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. William grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved helping his father with the ranch work. Rose was bright and cheerful, always singing or dancing around the house. James was adventurous and fearless, keeping Catherine on her toes as he climbed everything and explored everywhere. In 1885, Catherine gave birth to twin girls, which took everyone by surprise. They named them Margaret and Emma, and the house descended into joyful chaos as Catherine and Thomas learned to manage 5 children under the age of 8. "We are outnumbered," Thomas joked one evening as they collapsed into bed, exhausted after a particularly trying day. "We are blessed," Catherine corrected, though she was too tired to open her eyes. "That too," Thomas agreed. He pulled her close, and she nestled into his side, the familiar comfort of his presence soothing her. "I love you." "I love you too," Catherine murmured, already half asleep. As the 1880s rolled on, their children grew and the ranch flourished. William, at 12, was already a capable ranch hand, helping his father with the cattle. Rose, at 10, was learning to cook and sew from Catherine. James, at 8, was still wild but beginning to settle into responsibility. The twins, at 5, were inseparable and into everything. Catherine was 36 now, and Thomas was 41. They were no longer young, but they were happy. Their love had only deepened with time, weathering the challenges of raising children and running a ranch. They still made time for each other, stealing moments alone when they could, remembering why they had fallen in love in the first place. One evening in the summer of 1890, Catherine and Thomas took a walk together after supper, leaving the older children in charge of the younger ones. They walked out to the pasture where the cattle grazed peacefully in the fading light. "Remember when there were only 50 head," Catherine said. "Now look at us. 200 and growing," Thomas said proudly. "We have built something good here." "We have," Catherine agreed. She slipped her hand into his. "I was thinking today about how far we have come. 14 years ago I was living in that mill, thinking my life was over, and now look at everything we have. 5 beautiful children, a successful ranch, a life full of love and purpose. Sometimes I cannot believe it is real." "It is real," Thomas assured her. "And you helped build all of it. None of this would exist without you. The ranch would have failed years ago if you had not been managing the finances. The children would not exist without you. I would still be a lonely bachelor living in a house that was not a home. You made all the difference, Catherine. You made everything better." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. Even after all these years, Thomas could still move her with his words, his unwavering love and appreciation for her. "You saved my life," she said. "In every way that matters. You gave me a reason to live again, a future to look forward to. I owe you everything." "You do not owe me anything," Thomas said. "But if you insist on tallying debts, then I owe you just as much. We saved each other." That is what love does. It rescues us from loneliness and despair and gives us something worth fighting for. They stood together in the pasture, holding hands as the sun set behind the hills. The cattle lowed softly. In the distance, they could hear their children's laughter floating on the evening breeze. Catherine thought about that night 14 years ago when Thomas had found her in the mill and offered her a seat at his table. She had taken that seat, and in doing so, she had found her home. Not just a physical place, but a belonging, a purpose, a love that had transformed her entire life. She had gone from having nothing to having everything, and she was grateful for every single day. "I love you," she said to Thomas, the words as true and meaningful now as they had been the first time she said them. "I love you too," Thomas replied, pulling her close. "Always and forever." As they walked back to the house together, Catherine felt a deep contentment settle over her. This was her life. This was her family. This was her home. And it was more than she ever could have dreamed of during those dark days in the mill. The story of Catherine and Thomas was one of hardship transformed into hope, of survival turning into thriving, of two lonely people finding each other and building something beautiful together. It was a love story born from compassion and grown through partnership and devotion. Years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and family milestones. William married a kind young woman from town and brought her home to the ranch, eventually taking over more of the day-to-day operations as Thomas began to slow down. Rose married a schoolteacher and moved to Madison, but visited often with her growing family. James decided to become a veterinarian, studying in Milwaukee, before returning to Mineral Point to set up a practice. The twins both married brothers from a neighboring ranch, creating one large, interconnected family. Catherine became a grandmother, and then a great-grandmother. The house she and Thomas had filled with their own children became a gathering place for an ever-growing extended family. Holiday dinners required 2 tables pushed together. Summer meant grandchildren running through the yard, learning to ride horses and help with the cattle just as their parents had. Thomas and Catherine grew old together, their hair turning gray, their hands becoming gnarled with age. But their love never wavered. They still held hands when they walked. They still sat together on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset. They still kissed each other goodnight every single night. In the spring of 1915, Thomas fell ill. It started as a cough that would not go away and progressed into something more serious. The doctor said it was pneumonia, and at Thomas's age, there was little that could be done. Catherine nursed him through it, barely leaving his side, but they both knew the end was coming. On a warm May evening, with the windows open and the sound of birdsong drifting in, Thomas took Catherine's hand and smiled at her. "Do not look so sad," he said, his voice weak but tender. "We had a good run, did we not?" "The best," Catherine said through her tears. "But I am not ready to say goodbye." "Neither am I," Thomas admitted, "but I am grateful for every day we had together, for our children and grandchildren, for the life we built. I have no regrets, Catherine, none at all." "Neither do I," Catherine whispered, "except that we do not have more time." "We had 40 years," Thomas said. That is more than most people get, and I loved you every single day of those 40 years. I loved you too, Catherine said. I love you still, I always will. Thomas squeezed her hand weakly. Do you remember the night we met, when I found you in that mill? Every detail, Catherine said. I knew that night, Thomas said. When I saw you there, so brave and so broken, I knew you were going to change my life. I just did not know how much. You gave me everything, Catherine, everything that mattered. You gave me everything too, Catherine said. You saved me, in every way a person can be saved, Thomas smiled. We saved each other. That was always the truth of us. We were two lost people who found each other and made something beautiful. He closed his eyes then, still holding Catherine's hand, and his breathing became shallower. Catherine sat with him through the night, holding his hand, talking to him even after she was not sure he could hear anymore. She told him about their first dance, their wedding day, the births of their children. She reminded him of jokes that had made them laugh and challenges they had overcome together. She thanked him for every kindness, every moment of love, every year they had shared. As dawn broke, Thomas took one last breath and was gone. Catherine sat beside him, still holding his hand, and wept for the man who had been her savior, her partner, her love, her home. The funeral was well attended. Thomas had been respected in the community, known as a fair and honest man. But it was his family who filled the church. 5 children with their spouses, 17 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren. They had all come to say goodbye to the man who had built their family, who had created the foundation on which all their lives rested. Catherine moved through the following weeks in a haze of grief. The house felt empty without Thomas in it. She found herself turning to tell him something, only to remember he was gone. She lay in their bed at night, missing the warmth of his body beside her, the sound of his breathing. But she was not alone. Her children rallied around her, taking turns staying at the house to keep her company. Her grandchildren visited often, bringing life and noise and distraction. And slowly, the sharp edge of grief began to dull into something more bearable. Catherine was 62 years old when Thomas died. She lived another 11 years, watching her grandchildren grow and have children of their own. She remained sharp and capable until the end, still managing the ranch books, still cooking for family gatherings, still telling stories about the old days. She talked about Thomas often, keeping his memory alive for the younger generations who had never known him or had only vague childhood memories. She told them how he had found her in the mill, how he had offered her a seat at his table, how that simple act of kindness had changed the course of her entire life. He was the best man I ever knew, she would say, and I was the luckiest woman in the world to have been loved by him. Catherine passed away peacefully in her sleep in the winter of 1926, 3 months shy of her 73rd birthday. She was buried beside Thomas in the Mineral Point Cemetery, their graves side by side overlooking the rolling Wisconsin hills they had both loved. On her gravestone, beneath her name and dates, William had inscribed a simple message: "Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, she lived a life of love." And it was true. Catherine had lived a life of love, love that had rescued her from despair, love that had sustained her through hardship, love that had brought her more joy than she ever thought possible, love that had created a family and a legacy that would continue long after she was gone. The ranch stayed in the family for generations. William's children took it over, then his grandchildren. The house was expanded and modernized, but the bones of the original structure remained, the place where Thomas had brought Catherine that first night and offered her a home. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind whispered through the hills and the cattle lowed peacefully in the pasture, people said they could feel the presence of Thomas and Catherine still there, the love they had built into every board and beam, the foundation of everything that came after. It was a love story for the ages, a story of survival and hope, of kindness repaid tenfold, of two people who found each other in the wilderness and created something that would last forever. A story that began with a simple act of compassion and ended with a legacy of love that would never die. Catherine had been living on hardtack and rainwater, alone and desperate when Thomas found her. He offered her a seat at his table, and in doing so, he offered her a life. She took it, and together they built something beautiful. Together they proved that even in the hardest times, even when all seems lost, love can still bloom, hope can still flourish, and two broken people can still find wholeness in each other. That was the story of Thomas Quinn and Catherine Walsh, a cowboy and a woman who had lost everything, who found each other in the wilds of Wisconsin and built a love that would echo through the generations. It was a story of the American West, of hardship and perseverance, of the triumph of compassion over cruelty, of love over loneliness. And it all began with 6 simple words. "This seat at my table is yours now." Those words had changed everything. They had been an invitation, a promise, a beginning. And from that beginning grew a love story that would be told and retold by the descendants of Thomas and Catherine for over a century. A reminder that even in the darkest times, a single act of kindness can change the world.